So I'm here today with Anthony Koutoulis, also known as Coots, who's Deputy Vice-Chancellor of Research at the University of Tasmania, and Stephen Cahoon, who's Head of Sensor T. Welcome, and thank you for the invitation. You may know that I've been involved in Industry 4.0 for quite some time now, and met the UTAS guys back in May last year, May 2019, and was really impressed with what's happening nationally with the various Industry 4.0 test labs, but specifically around what University of Tasmania is doing around the agricultural area. First to you, Coots, what are the outcomes that you're hoping that the university will be able to provide to industry at large?
Well, John, firstly, thanks for coming down to Tasmania. It's always great to have people come and visit. I guess I might just start a bit backwards from there, and just focus on what we're trying to do as a university, because I think the test labs is a great example of how we work with industry on really important issues that are going to make a difference. Our university is really committed to making a difference for Tasmania, and that does mean working much better with our Tasmanian community across all sectors. So our overall strategy is to make sure that Tasmania is more prosperous, equitable and sustainable. So in that frame, an economic lift where we actually get much better export markets, much more jobs on island, is actually quite important to what we're trying to do in Tasmania. And I think Australia is actually focusing on that as a nation.
Yes.
And I think we're seeing a lot of the policy settings that the federal government is delivering recently, and I think it's been amplified during COVID, where there's an increased attention on industry-linked research, getting better connectivity between the university sector and the industry, making sure that we have work-integrated learning programs, and there's a big acknowledgement to the regional context. And I think this is quite critical. And the situation of the test lab, which is Northern Tasmania, where we have strengths in agriculture and food processing, I think is a great example of using a particular vehicle to deliver on what this state needs for Tasmania.
Yes.
But I think it's not just for Tasmania, because we think, and I think this is where the test lab is part of the national program, our focus is on an area where the country has decided we have a particular advantage and we can provide a contribution to the nation, and we think, in fact, the world. And so from a Tasmanian perspective, we think the test lab actually amplifies one of our areas of advantage where we have distinctiveness. And so we want to try and extract most of that distinctiveness and value on island. We're trying to get much more processing, because we know that's where the higher value of this activity will take place. We do know that we do want to use the big data to actually inform the decision on farm, but also the added value that we can get from processing on island. So we're trying to use the test lab to actually deliver on what we think Tasmania needs. It's not what the university is going to advantage the university, but how we can provide a contribution to Tasmania. So that's why I love the test lab.
So more of a service role to solve industry's problems.
Absolutely is. Our strategy is about a contribution. We view this as a Team Tasmania approach. We are the only university that actually has a commitment to this state. There's no other university that has a responsibility, if you like, to actually make sure Tasmania is better. So in that context, we have been deliberate in how we've reset our strategy. It's much more about making contribution in not just economic areas, but also in education attainment, in social inclusion, environmental outcomes, health outcomes, and also cultural outcomes. This particular one, I think, has a particular focus on the economy, which is actually critical to make sure that we're prosperous. But it's just one example where there's a specific project where we are working with the external partners. So what we do has to be anchored to the outside. It has to have relevance to the outside community. The only way we can make a difference is to actually work with. That does mean using vehicles such as the test lab to actually co-design the work that's required, so that we're at project conception thinking about the impact of the research that we're doing. We don't think about the impact after the research has happened, because that's unlikely to actually make a difference. So co-designing, front-loading decision-making, working with industry, having a fantastic external advisory body telling us, we want to listen to what the problems that need to be solved, so that we can mobilise our capability to deliver on solutions to those problems. And we really want to get an understanding of where maximum impact will be. So if we do have an economic lens, where is the most value? How can we make sure we focus our attention, our efforts, together with industry to work on where the high value opportunities are?
I remember reading somewhere recently that said solutions have no value, they derive value from the problems that they solve.
Yep.
I thought that was a very apt quote. Stephen, as head of Sensor-T, could you tell us a little bit more about Sensor-T and what its aims are and objectives?
Well, Sensor-T has very similar objectives to what the Test Lab has. So in Sensor-T, we're a research unit within the university, and we focus very, very much on the industry and government-related issues that may be solved by a data and technology approach.
Okay.
So to put it in a nutshell, what we do is we enhance business decision-making through the use of data and technology. Mm-hmm. And if we put that in the context of the Test Lab, it's a very, very similar thing. Mm. So I guess people look at IoT, the Internet of Things, and then they look at Industry 4.0. And from my perspective, the real big difference is that IoT, you can do a single project that relates to putting in a sensor or some sensors. But from an Industry 4 perspective, it's the integration. And it's how, with all of this equipment that we have through the Test Lab, how we can start to integrate that better to really provide value for our partners. And if we can get through to the stage of being a complete supply chain, then I think we're on a real winner, because it'll be surprising what sort of issues start to emerge from that. And I think at the moment, we think there are particular issues or problems that industry is being confronted with. But as we get more data, I think we'll find there are others.
And what we can't measure, we don't measure, we can't improve.
That's
It's absolutely critical. And I'm heartened to hear you say that you see integration as one of the key factors there, because my experience in the manufacturing world has been that integration, I call it the secret sauce, because many organisations have islands of stuff or information, whether it's in spreadsheets, copious spreadsheets, and there's no relationship between one piece of data from one island to another piece of information. And the more we can integrate that information and make it available to look for cause and effect, the more value we can extract from it.
And I think key to that, John, is the data sharing.
Yes.
I think we're only really now coming to terms with what is data and what is the value of data and what value can the data provide. And I think as people find there's more and more value from the data, some may want to hold it very, very dear to themselves. But through the Test Lab, we're really trying to encourage our industry partners to want to share that data and learn from each other from what that data can provide. And this piece of data may provide an insight, a particular insight to one partner, but it may provide something completely different to someone else. And that's sharing along that whole supply chain. That's the key to it, because there's a cascading effect that occurs as that knowledge is transferred right the way down through the chain.
Yeah, and imagine a situation where you're, for example, monitoring a farm producing a particular product, and you suddenly decide, or you realise through data mining that particular conditions produce a really good yield. That can be shared further along with other businesses to give them the opportunity as well to improve what they do. So, Kurtz, what's the actual outcomes that you could be looking for from this whole Industry 4 Test Lab within UTAS itself?
Well, I guess it's not about solving what the university wants. I think we need to make that clear. It's what Tasmania wants and what Tasmania needs. And I think, so who is the beneficiary of this kind of activity? I think is a good way of framing it. And I think there's a lot of industry benefits out of this. And in particular, I think on farm, I think farmers, they want to do the right thing. They have aspirations where they want to make sure that they're doing the right thing by the environment, that if there's any waste, they're trying to eliminate waste or to extract value from waste. I think so the aspirations are there, but in many cases they don't have the information or the data to inform their decision making.
Yes.
So I think the beauty of this project is to have the data in a way that a farmer can actually make a decision to inform their business. I think that's really quite important. And then I think from the processing side of the value chain, in the way that Stephen explains is, so who actually cares about that product? So from an integrity perspective, I think, from a brand Tasmania perspective, I think, people want our produce and we need to be able to provide that and verify that. and make sure that it's of high integrity. I think that's what our community wants, and that's the expectation. And our producers want to provide that authentic, high integrity product. That then actually allows potential value to be generated from that, and to be known for that. And I think this is where the distinctiveness and our advantage comes through. So I think that does provide an opportunity for data to inform the business model, to actually see where the most value could be extracted. And so where would those markets be? So some parts of the world may care about it more than others.
Yes.
So I think we want to be able to have an informed conversation about getting the data to actually inform the business model. I think that's where the true value is. And from a Tasmanian perspective, and from getting back to what the university is trying to do from a strategic perspective, we want to make Tasmania more prosperous, more equitable and more sustainable. Part of that is actually getting an economic lift for the whole Tasmanian community. And if the whole Tasmanian community benefits, we think that a lot of the social concerns within Tasmania can also be lifted. And so we're very much looking at social inclusion. So we actually want a prosperous society, but also an equitable society where we can share the benefits and make sure that those who have been left behind in the past are not left behind. So a lot of that does require, a huge economic lift. And I think we're seeing, for example, with that provides opportunity. So with more jobs, I think there's more prosperity. And we know that a lot of the social determinants are actually geared around economy and around education. Yes. So if we can actually address some of those and help move the dial on some of those areas, I think we'll get benefits in our other outcome areas. So I think there's this virtuous circle where, we think that we could make Tasmania a much more prosperous place if we work with industry on the big issues that are going to make a difference. And we think vehicles like the Test Lab, which is an investment from the federal government and also from the university, and with great support from the state government, working together on specific projects.
Yes.
And I think the framework this provides is wonderful. And we're very happy to be part of the Team Tasmania to make a difference.
Thank you. I heard you mention before, Stephen, that you sort of see the Industry 4 Test Lab as a front door, yes, like as a means for business to engage with universities that perhaps in the past might have been a little bit nebulous in how to have that engagement. Could you talk a bit to how you see that changing now?
Look, as Coach has already mentioned, the part about listening is so critical. We really need to understand and engage with our industry partners to find out what's really impacting on them, and then see if we can talk with them in a co-designing methodology to then come up with a solution that fits their needs and maybe fits their budget. And through the test lab, with this equipment that we've been able to purchase, that then really helps them to understand that cost effectiveness even further, because what it does is it enables them to trial out some of the equipment and trial it in a very safe place. And because a lot of this equipment is portable, trial it on their location, so even better. But the added bonus that they'll receive is that they've got access to the university researchers. And this isn't just university researchers from one area, it's university researchers from a whole range of different, normally not related areas. And that's the way that we can help them to look through any problem they have through multiple lenses. And through that's where the innovation comes out. That's where the different type of solution that they may not have anticipated before may occur. But we need them to guide us and to help us to understand what those issues are. And by having the front door, it means that we're much more easier to connect with. And through our industry review panel that we have, 13 members on there, that's also made up of industry associations. Mm-hmm. That's another means of having that connectivity with the wider number of SMEs throughout Tasmania.
So the World Economic Forum, I think probably a decade ago, started this thing called the Global Lighthouse Network, which was a collection of businesses that over time have been invited in to monitor the Industry 4.0 journey. And I think at the moment there's around 54 businesses in that Global Lighthouse Network. They're big end of town names like the Siemens and the Schneiders and the Procter & Gamble's of the world. I'm wondering, are you seeing from your experience in Sensity a democratization of data in the sense that the cost to monitor and collect has dropped remarkably in the last decade?
Oh, look, certainly. I recall when Sensitive first started, so it was 8.5 years ago now, that a lot of the work was on developing the data platform. But nowadays, you don't need to develop a data platform. There are many that are out there, and they're quite affordable. Sensors have become quite affordable. And the
Almost
benefits...
disposable.
Yes, and some are disposable.
Yeah.
But what it means for industry is they don't have to buy into the full package. They don't have to purchase the full suite. And I think what's important is that they know that they can start off with 1 or 2 sensors to collect some data, perhaps marry that with some historical data or data collected through the Bureau of Meteorology or from other sources, and blend that together into something that's useful for them. So where I think a number of years ago, it was about you must have the platinum model, which is quite expensive and there's a lot of risk associated with it. But what we'll be able to show through the test lab is that if you want to start off with a bronze model, 1 or 2 sensors, trial it out, see what you think, build up some trust, engage with the university researchers, find out more detail, and then think, oh, I've really got some good value from that. Now I want to engage further. So it is about helping to start them on the journey, and this is why we talk a lot about creating awareness. Now, what is industry for? How does it provide value for my organisation? What do I need to actually to get that first step? And then through looking at other larger organisations, find out whereabouts could actually go to, where that journey could continue on to.
So, Coots, how would that look if someone out there sees this stuff and it finally gets to the web, and there's now the virtual website, plus you've also got mobile test labs? How do you see someone actually engaging with the university? What would that look like to you?
Well, I think the industry, and I think, great work that the team's been doing with the industry advisory panel is, I think when we've done a listening, I think there's a demystifying of what the technology actually is, and I think a de-risking from a business perspective. So we've been very mindful about what the need is right now, and so we're leaning into that. And so I think the getting back to your question, the website and the virtual kind of platforms I think there's a whole lot of education that we're going to really focus on to try and get a better understanding of what the technology, but also the benefits of the technology.
Yes.
I think, if you're, again, looking at, what are you trying to solve? They're not saying, I want a technology, I want something for my business and to make a difference in getting some value.
Typically to improve my quality in
Correct.
for example.
If want to make some efficiencies, or they're looking at an environmental benefit, or getting back to reducing waste, or whatever it might be. I think the opportunity is to actually, what's your problem, which may or may not require a digital solution. And I think when we do identify what those digital solutions might be, it actually is an iterative process, having that conversation. And so we think it's very much catered around that initial conversation about the need. But I think over time, we know that Industry 4.0 is going to make a difference. But the invitation needs to be there, the value needs to be understood, and then the leaning in. So, and this does require, very focused attention on what the demand is of what the problem we're trying to solve, and where the technology could actually make a difference.
And what do you see as potential opportunities out there for the agtech side of life? Not only on farm, but through the supply chain itself, so end-to-end view?
Look, I think there's an opportunity for that traceability and provenance. So as Coots alluded to before, organisations like Brand Tasmania, building up this brand of what does being Tasmanian mean? Well, we need to make sure that the product, when it arrives in this interstate or international markets, is arriving with as much shelf life as possible, to make sure it arrives on time and actually arrives, but also it's in the right sort of quality. And one way we can do that is by tracking it right the way through that whole supply chain, and we have technology now that assists us to do that, where the industry partner can look at that and understand exactly where that product is. And we had a nice little use case of that only very recently, and it was just within Tasmania, where the product that we were tracking was lost. They couldn't find it because we think what happened was the reply address had fallen off or wasn't put on, and so the tracking device was able to find it and then help to recover it. But it also, because this was a brand new chain for this business, it helped them to identify all the different breaches that were occurring with the temperature. And that was useful for them because they need to make sure that when it arrives at its destination where there was further processing being undertaken, that there weren't any pathogens in there. And the temperature is one of the mechanisms they use to make sure that that doesn't occur. So there's already examples that we're finding that are low cost but useful. And it helps them to see, right now I understand the supply chain bit, the transport bit, now what's the next sections I can start looking at, whether it's on farm or getting to the warehouse or the extra processing, and also that reduction of waste. Because throughout the world there's billions upon billions of dollars being lost in the perishable chains. And if we can identify where that is, maybe we don't have to work so hard on the productivity side, because we're growing a lot of food that ends up being wasted along the way.
So I remember hearing, just as COVID was hitting Australia, that we have enough food to feed 75 million people. Mm-hmm. So there's lots, obviously, of our produce that's being exported. And Tasmania in particular, I see, it's no surprising that the agtech was the area that UTAS decided to focus on, because certainly as a brand, Tasmania, the stuff that comes out of here is certainly well regarded for its quality. And so the provenance of that being able to be traced through the supply chain, not only from the point of view of quality, but also, am I really getting stuff that actually was made in Tasmania?
Yep.
So I think that's a really important piece of how the whole supply chain can be monitored to make sure that what the consumer is buying is what they think they're buying.
Yeah, and I think the explicit understanding of what the consumer actually wants is actually vital if we are going to talk about value, because at the end of the day, the customer is the one who kind of decides.
Yeah.
And I think you mentioned COVID. I think in the COVID world, some things that I think we already knew have been amplified. Mm-hmm. So I think, people were making informed decisions around more healthy options.
Yes.
They were thinking about, what's the brand of the company and what values does a company stand for? Do they have a plan around an environmental strategy? Are they considering about, the jobs and the people and the working environments? So I think there's increased attention to what a company stands for. And if you can evidence that by way of a digital kind of provision and actually be able to authenticate that, that is something that the consumer actually wants. Decisions are being made on these values-based considerations. And I think the COVID has actually amplified, I think, what we already knew. And if you look at the global trends, there is increased attention to, nutritional value of produce. What are the environmental implications of, how much resource was used to actually manufacture that produce. So there's increased attention. So I think people want to know what they're eating, where it's coming from, because they value that. That, I think, does provide a really interesting way of thinking about what business model and what kind of digital information needs to be provided as part of that integrity and authentication process.
And I'd agree, we've certainly seen what I'd call a shift from the profit-centric models of business to the heart-centric models of business. Circular economy, sustainability, reduce waste to landfill, is it being ethically produced? And I think that the whole Industry 4.0 provides a framework or a platform where a lot of that stuff can be monitored through the process so that people know they're buying ethical products as well.
And I think, that's why, Stephen referenced, this is a whole of university push. And I used a phrase I said at the start about anchoring to the outside. So really understanding what the problem is and then getting our capability. So it's a purpose-driven or demand-driven model of research that's supply-informed, supply being our capability. And, we have wonderful, scientists, technology experts, no problem there. But sometimes you might need a creative artist to actually look at what the packaging might be that actually allows that label to not fall off.
Yes.
And so there's a creative aspect there. There's also the social license aspect that we've just touched on, getting back to values. So it's not just scientists working on these projects. We've got our social scientists, we've got our creative people involved in this, and we've got our health researchers looking at the nutritional content of their food. So I think this is a whole of university mobilising, anchoring to the problem on the outside and drawing the wonderful capability across the university. And it's not just the university, we have great partners. There's a lot of knowledge already in industry. We don't need to replicate that, we just leverage that wonderful capability from our industry partners. So it's an ecosystem approach.
And you used the term before, on island, coming from the mainland, as we call the rest of Australia. It was an interesting term that you used, because I've never actually heard it as Tasmania referred, but it makes so much sense that there's
Well, you
so
need to
much
come
happening.
here more often, John.
Yeah, I do. There's so much happening on island, and I can see this is a great opportunity for you, Tas, to shine in that realm of brand Tasmania and making sure that what leaves the island, off to mainland or overseas, is of the highest quality.
And I think we did mention before about where Tasmania can make a contribution. I think, I mentioned the policy settings from a federal perspective.
Yes.
I think the universities are in an interesting place right now where I think there's going to be increased differentiation of what universities actually do. And they're going to be really good at certain things and really focus on those areas. So we want to be part of a conversation where we are known for certain things, where more things can happen on our island, make sure that we can deliver on what the nation and the world needs. And I think, getting back to COVID, I know we're in COVID times, but it's interesting how increased attention about, Australian advanced manufacturing and the capability we need as a country. What does that mean for Tasmania? What does that mean for some regional parts of Tasmania? And I think getting back to the policy instruments, there's increased attention on a regional focus, a distributed model. And I think we're listening to, not just what the industry, but also some of the policy settings and mobilising around that.
And the breaking of supply chains, from the point of view of imports, particularly from Southeast Asia during the early stages of COVID, I've seen really wake up a lot of local manufacturers to opportunity, from making ventilators to masks to, repurposing vineyards to make isopropyl alcohol for hand sanitisers and all that sort of stuff. So we certainly show that as a culture, nationally also, we can pivot quite well. So I think universities are going to play a really important part in those innovations and opportunities that are starting to emerge.
And John, can I just come back to Coot's point about on island, because it's also what we can do from this island to help others interstate, not mainland, interstate, to help people interstate, because the learnings that we'll be pulling out of this test lab will actually be quite large, because it'll be about technological adoption, how we see SMEs engaging with researchers, engaging with technology, engaging with data, and then to see if they want to take that journey further. So we'll have a better understanding about adoption cycles. We'll have better understanding of what technologies that SMEs and other businesses actually want. We'll have better understanding of the network that we need to put out there to collect all of this data, and the modelling and the artificial intelligence that in time will start to come in. And then that will be able to provide advice to others in other parts of Australia on how to utilise that. So I think there's a big case about the from Tasmania as well, that we're in the box seat at the moment. The reason we're in the box seat is because we have a very active industry panel that has an interest in Industry 4 and seeing how that can be more and more successful here in Tasmania.
And for me, that's what really excited me about UTAS's approach of Industry 4.0 to the AgTech realm, is because if you solve problems here, for example, in terms of wine production, then you've got Victoria Valley, you've got Clare Valley and Barossa, you've got Margaret River in WA. The lots of stuff that you can learn here can be rolled out through various other parts of Australia, from the dairy industry through cheese making, through a whole lot of other areas. So I'm really excited that Tasmania is taking the lead, UTAS is taking the lead here in this Industry 4.0 test lab, specifically geared towards agriculture.
Yeah, and there's a heavy focus on research, and I guess that's why I'm involved here as a Deputy Vice-Chancellor of Research, but we understand it's not just a research issue. There's a whole skills opportunity, what's the learning and teaching academic offerings that we provide, and how do we actually provide that to a workforce that requires it. Yeah. So is it, a 3-year program, or is it a short course? Is it a micro-credential? How do we get, lifelong learning into the conversation, so that we know that once adopted, the workforce needs to be commensurate and working with. So what's the right kind of training or skills development that needs to go hand in glove with this process. Because without alignment of that, you can easily get disconnected. So we want to increase our attention of that, joining up the research and the skills and the workforce development. Because when we talk to industry, again, listening very carefully, they've got some research challenges, but they also want to work on what the workforce development plan is. So what's their workforce in 5, 10, 15 years? How do you have a sustainable workforce? And again, getting back to, we are, the only university that really cares about Tasmania. We want to join up not just the research, but also our learning and teaching offerings.
And particularly around the STEM areas, which has been identified as a national skills shortage, and I think international skills shortage as well.
Yeah.
And another approach that we're using in terms of readying that workforce for the future is with our farm bots. So that's the interaction we're having with schools and TAFE, where we're putting these out on site to help school children as they're going through to understand how does STEM, agricultural science, robotics, Industry 4 all actually fit together. So that they'll have these huge farm bots on location to help them to learn about all those different aspects of it. So they're not so they're not singular dimension in looking at the problem. They're looking at from all these different aspects. So that future focused is something that's very, very important to us. And then it gets people from a very early stage seeing what sort of benefits can be gained from that technological Industry 4 future that we're all heading towards.
And I think going back to the national program, so we know that we were part of the national set of test labs. I think it's wonderful because I think the shared challenge is that workforce development for the whole nation.
Yes.
And although these are test labs that are focused on a particular sector, fantastic. I think the learnings from what's the workforce required, I think there's a commonality across the nation that I think we can actually share learnings across all the different test labs.
And I think it was a couple of years ago, Cisco published a report from research that was pretty shocking that said 75% of IoT projects are failing. And out of that research, they showed the sort of main factors as to why. And the collaboration piece was the one in the organisations that weren't succeeding. The collaboration piece was the one that was missing the most. So it was in manufacturing particularly, it was the collaboration between OT and IT, and those that actually got their house in order. When OT and IT kissed and made up and realised they'd worked for the same organisation and started to work together rather than against, those organisations were the one who succeeded. So I guess from a test lab point of view, the collaboration with other universities in their findings, even though they might be in different sectors, is going to be important.
Oh, absolutely. We think there's wonderful opportunities by working together. I think the partnership model that we talked about, collaboration, that's what part of the skills for the future workforce. I think that is a really vital component. If you can't work in a team, if you you can't co-design by yourself. And so there's front loading that we call it, working with our partners, getting the right partners and designing the work to actually make it more like, it's hard enough to get things to work, but I tell you what, if you're not sitting with the people who are going to take the research and use it, it's unlikely to make a difference.
And it was interesting, a couple of weeks ago, Simon Sinek was doing a broadcast from the US with his Start With Why and his new book, The Infinite Game, and he was saying, try and do brainstorming via Zoom. But you need to be in the one room with a whiteboard. There are lots of whiteboard markers, and that's where the ideas, the innovations come from. We need to work together and collaborate together in order for that innovation to emerge.
In many ways, we talk about, if you focus on the outcome and then back solve from that, rather than starting from here and then hoping it's going to land somewhere. And I think, getting back to that back solving, you're probably more likely to make it work, but probably going to be more efficient, because as you back solve, you're probably going to only focus on the things that you really need, as opposed to just pushing something out.
Yeah.
I agree.
And John, just in relation to those IoT fails, I think another reason for that is because people were thinking that it's a silver bullet. It's going to solve everything, not realising the framework they have to have in place around that, and also the importance of people within that.
Yeah.
And we keep on thinking technology and people are divorced, but they're actually not. Someone has to be able to understand it and look at it, because we haven't got to the point of that true singularity yet where the machines will take over. And we're reliant on people. We're reliant on people to make judgment calls. We'll provide them with more and more evidence to sharpen up some of those decisions so that it's not always a rule of thumb. But when we talk about Industry 4, it's not an easy journey. It is a journey that's a step by step that we have to take. And if we take it knowing that there's a destination where we're trying to get to, but there's a number of steps in it, I think then we'll see greater success rather than the fails. It's the ones who just pick it up and go, oh, look, the data will be fine, but not realising poor quality data means poor quality decisions.
And I was taught a very important lesson back in 2005 with a client when I spoke to them about providing a system to solve the problem. Mm-hmm. And we walked through it with the client and they said, come back in 12 months. And I said, why? And they said, well, we know our processes are not robust enough to go for sort of automatic top floor to shop floor integration. And we know our people certainly aren't aligned from a change management and culture point of view. Go away and come back in 12 months. So we did and went back in 12 months and they've now prepared the groundwork. And that's when I first learned about the alignment between people, systems and processes. And then suddenly the penny dropped that how many times have I seen in my life a system, a technology related system put in place that had failed miserably. And it often wasn't the technology itself, it was the implementation of the technology. So the processes and the people weren't aligned. And if you digitise a broken process, you get a broken digitised process. So, so the people piece for me is absolutely paramount, and hence the education piece for people to understand what actually is Industry 4.0 and how can you apply it right down to an individual couple of sensors on a farm all the way through to a full greenfield manufacturing facility.
And I think that point that you raised earlier, John, about the lighthouse organisations, I think that's what we'll be looking for here in Tasmania. Because if we can find those early adopters who are really finding some success and value, they're the ones who will go and spread the word. They're the ambassadors that we really need, and they're the ones that the other industry, other SMEs will look to and go, it worked for them, it can work for me. Well, they just become a bit more competitive than us. We really have to adopt. So that's the lighthouse name. I think it's quite right. But we need to find those ones here in Tasmania.
So you'll be looking for the evangelists.
Most certainly.
The innovators, the early adopters who'll get in, get started, learn along the way, fail along the way, no doubt, but learn from that. False evidence, something else. I'm trying to think the word. There was an acronym for failure I learned the other day. I thought it was pretty smart. So where do you see it going from here? What's the next steps in terms of the evolution of the test lab?
Well, I think that the two main focal areas that the team's focus on right now is around the demystifying. So I think this is where the education, what the opportunity might be. And I think, going back to Stephen's comment around, the lighthouse, I think the evidence of there is an outcome. So there's actually made a measurable change to an industry based on Industry 4.0 is really where the rubber hits the road. Yes. Until you get that, we're just talking about something. And so once the evidence is there, and that's part of the demystifying process of actually, here's how this is the example here, here's a demonstrator, the prototyping and the proof of concept, if you like, and then sharing that. And that's really quite critical for anyone to be engaged. I mean, anyone who makes a decision, they want to make an informed decision based on, I'm going to get something out of it. There's going to be something better, something improved. And I think how they take that demystification process to a de-risking. We know that there's a transition that's required. Every business is different, so it's not us telling them what to do. It's about using this information to actually inform your own decisions within your own industry, your own company, your own sector, and then de-risking that. So I think they're the two main focal areas. But I think over time, we're going to be seeing, what we think is a huge opportunity of, implementation across the board in a variety of different sectors, where we get, if you like, industrial implementation of the model. So we see that as the future, and I think that's what's going to make, getting back to what we said before, Tasmania more prosperous.
And I'm seeing too in the marketplace that the concept, or what was called proof of concept, which is really a technological outcome, is the technology going to scale or do what I need it to do? But I'm seeing a shift in the marketplace at the moment to what they're calling now a proof of value as well. So the proof of concept tells you that it's technologically capable, but are we also able to now do a proof of value over the top of that to prove that it's actually going to return some decent return on investment? Are you seeing that at all in your?
Certainly, and it is because technology can move so fast at different times, it seems to go in spurts. Then we need to make sure that the sort of advice that we're providing and the sort of equipment that we're using, we need to make sure there's some agility built into that. Because they need to be able to adapt and move around. So it's looking at what's the core, what is the core issue that we're trying to solve, what will solve it, and there's 4 or 5 different options. But then if something changes, and it could be that there's a new network, for example, can these sensors still be used on that network? So I think that's the key, because otherwise it becomes very costly, and then people get burnt, and then there's fails. But once again, so it's the adaptability and agility as we're working through all of this.
And one of the things I'm seeing out in the marketplace is I find for manufacturers particularly as a challenge is they don't actually know where to get started. So they end up almost being paralysed by their own analysis, because they're making that, what happens if I choose this platform? Will it be there in 5 years' time? If they just got over themselves, and the answer is probably not. But you can't wait forever. You've got to start somewhere. It's like buying the first colour television or the Apple Watch or the iPhone or whatever it is. You have to start and adopt these technologies with proper education and demystify all that, so they know where to start, where to go, and what the maturity steps are that they're going through. Are you seeing that as well?
Yeah, and maybe, Stephen, you might want to talk about the operating model. So it's not about industry coming to us, we're going to industry. So we're going on to the farm with some of the infrastructure that's been invested in the program. I think that's where we really need to start.
Yes, and look, we've used the words demystify and de-risk a few times, and those 2 words actually came from our industry review panel. They were the ones who said they want this Industry 4 thing, they want that demystified, and they want to de-risk. They wanted a sandpit. And they were the ones who said to us, can you do it so you come out to us so we can see if this equipment works in our environment, not in a lab, but in our environment. So as an engagement strategy, it's just ideal for us. It gets our researchers out, working very, very closely with our industry partners, seeing what works over here compared to what might work over here, in case there's any tweaking that we need to work on that, and really fully understanding the problem that industry partner is going through. So certainly that de-risking and demystifying is key, and the development part of it, which is the education and enhancing skills and capabilities. But of course, the other one is we need to ensure that we deliver at the end of all of this here. And it's really interesting, because it's the test lab journey has already seemed to have went for quite some time, but the launch of this isn't until February, March next year. And you think of all the work that's occurred in this last year or so, and the amount of engagement that's occurred so far in readiness for this launch, after which that's when further trials and demonstrations will be undertaken.
Being February, March 2021.
2021, yes.
And I think it's important to acknowledge the support we've received from outside the university. So our external advisory committee, the farmers, we can't do this by ourselves. If we're going to make a difference, we need to work in partnership. And that takes their time. We understand that they're busy people. They're probably, focusing on other things, and they see it as a real investment. So we see it as a huge investment, and we really value their contribution.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. Is there anything finally you'd like to say before we wrap up?
I think one would be just to acknowledge that we're also in partnership with Siemens Australia. So Siemens is a partner of all the test labs, and already here in the university we use their product lifecycle software to help train our engineers, both at the Australian Maritime College and in the School of Engineering. But they also have another platform called MindSphere, which is their IoT Industry 4 platform. So we're looking at exploring the use of that and seeing how readily adaptable that is to SMEs. So I think that'll be an outcome that we can also feed back into Siemens that I think will be valuable for them.
Yep, and I'll probably just reiterate the importance of Test Lab helping us to come up with a new way of working. I think that's really critical, being anchored to the outside. I think it's helped facilitate that to actually happen, which I think is really important. Our model of research is increasing our attention with working with partners outside the university because they're the adopters of the research.
Yes.
And they're the ones who are the end users of the research. We will still have our academic outputs. We will still publish our journal articles. That is still, we will design that up front, but that's not the only thing that we will design. We have other elements that we are designing, and it's really focused on, increased productivity, creating jobs. Are there spin-out opportunities from this work, collaborative? All those are possible, but we are thinking about that much earlier. So the increased attention on anchoring our research to purpose and making a difference is fundamental, and it's wonderful to be part of the Test Lab, program in collaboration with other universities in the country to work with industry in this way.
Exciting times to be around.
Absolutely.
Very much.
So, Stephen, thank you for your time today.
Yes, John.
Anthony, thank you as well. And thanks for attending.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, John.